This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your source for the latest Iowa ag news headlines right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning team of Dustin Hoffman, Riley Smith, Mark Magnuson, and Andy Peterson. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Dustin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Huffman. Today is Friday, the 14th of March, 2025. So glad you could join us here today. Coming up in today's show, we're going to talk with Curt Kimmel of agmarket.net later on in the program to find out what happened in the closing markets. But first, we're going to talk with U.S. Soybean Export Council CEO Jim Sutter. We're going to first talk today about the trade situation and where we're seeing some growth and where we can hang our hat in after 2024. Talking with Jim Sutter of the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Jim, thanks so much for talking with us again, as always.
Thank you, Dustin. I look forward to the opportunity to talk with you.
All right, so soybeans right now, we know we talk prices, we talk about the markets, we talk about everything. But all in all, not a bad year to shake a stick at from exports-wise last year.
No, not a bad year last year, and starting out even better this year. So we're kind of halfway through the marketing year this year, and we've got overall exports up 14% versus where we were last year at this time. And what I kind of like to see is the rest of the world, aside from our biggest customer, is up about 35%, and we're pretty flat to China. Okay. So it's a nice mix of markets around the world. Last year we set a record with meal exports in 23-24, and we're on pace. We're above where we were last year, so we're on pace to set another record with meal, which is important with the crush plant expansions. So a lot of good things going on.
All right, so let's talk about you talk about those other markets. I mean, we've talked about the expansion, the growing middle class in Africa and Southeast Asia and stuff like that. I mean, is that still showing that upward trend? How are things going, and what are you looking at for as far as those export markets?
Well, you touched on Africa. So a market that is just really, it's about 4 times where we were last year at this time, is Egypt. And a few years ago, we would have talked about Egypt. They had really grown, and then they had a financial crisis. They're a pretty fragile economy. Okay. So when things go bad there, they just don't have money to spend on things. And so there were a couple of years where our exports to Egypt had really fallen off, but now they are back up, and we're at a couple million tons year to date versus a quarter of that last year, 500,000 tons. So that's a market, and that's based purely on people in Egypt consuming more poultry and fish and cooking oil. So that's the great kind of market. That's what we like to see. It's not based on them exporting to somewhere else. It's them consuming it right there in their country.
And it is interesting, as you mentioned, that middle class is growing in Africa.
Absolutely.
And something we hadn't thought of, at least not happening for a while. But, like you said, they're wanting those different meats, and obviously feeding the fish, feeding the poultry, feeding all that stuff. And, that's that whole thing we was talking about with grain and livestock always meshed together. But, seeing that growth, what other places besides Egypt,
So a country right next to Egypt actually is Algeria.
Yep.
And they hadn't been an importer at all, and all of a sudden they've started to import. They're at a couple 100,000 tons of soybean imports this year. They've built a couple big crush plants because their middle class is wanting to have more poultry to consume, those kind of things. So I think in that neighborhood we're seeing it, but let me shift to a couple of other places. We're seeing good, strong growth in Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. Vietnam is a country where we are seeing good growth this year. Philippines is always a good importer of soybean meal. That's continuing. And then if you go down to Latin America, a country like Colombia, Colombia's exports to Colombia are about double where they were last year at this time. So that's a country where we actually have a free trade agreement between the United States and Colombia, and that's one that has really helped. It's been in place since 2012, so it's an example of how those kind of things can work. But I would say many places around the world are doing pretty well.
So when you talk about, obviously, we're exporting meal, we're exporting beans, but you talk about Algeria's building crush plants on their own. Yep. What's a more economic driver for some of them to choose whether they're going to import the whole beans and crush themselves versus just importing the meal?
That's a really good question, and people ask me that regularly. So I think it really, you have to kind of sit back and think about, in the country, do they need both products, meal and oil, or do they need just one or the other? And let me give you a couple examples. The Philippines, our largest meal export market, they have their own supply of oil. They're the world's largest producer of coconut oil, which they use a lot for their cooking purposes. That's not what we use here, but there they use coconut oil. So they don't need, if you'd build a soybean crushing plant in the Philippines, they wouldn't know what to do with the oil. Okay. So that's why they import the meal. Mm-hmm. In Egypt, they need both the meal and the oil. So they import the whole bean, turn it into meal and oil right there, and use both products. So it really kind of depends on why one or the other. China's another big example. Some people say, well, why doesn't China start importing meal? Well, China needs both the meal and the oil, and they have a big crush industry that's been built up over the last 20 years. So as much as we may like them to import meal, I just don't think they will, because economically they need both, and they have an industry to produce that.
Okay. We'll have more with Jim Sutter of U.S. Soybean Export Council next week on Ag Matters PM to talk about the trade situation and what it could mean for soybeans if tariffs eventually do go into place as they were initiated originally with Canada and Mexico. Right now, we're going to take a short break and hear from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soy Checkoff. When we come back, we're going to talk with Curt Kimmel of agmarket.net. This is Ag Matters PM.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
It's time now for the Ag Matters PM Closing Market Summary, your source for market analysis and settlement prices from the day's trade in Chicago, courtesy of the folks at agmarket.net. We're back on Ag Matters PM here on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. Time to run down those closing markets, and definitely in the St. Patty's Day spirit already. Curt Kimmel of agmarket.net. Curt, did the markets get any of the luck of the Irish today?
Well, we're in the spirit. We've got the full moon today, Ides of March tomorrow, and St. Patty's Day Monday. I'm not on Monday, so we're getting a head start. Not a whole lot of luck of the green of the Irish here today. It kind of struggled back and forth. Corn down 6 cents in the front end, down 1 in the back. Beans were a little higher, up 4 or 5 cents, and the wheat market was down a nickel. Did see some corn sales and some bean oil sales take place. March options kind of went off the board here. Futures, that is, and it's mainly a commercial game. The March corn went off at 445.5. March beans 999.25, and the wheat at 545. And it's just a benchmark on the charts, on the continuous charts to watch. But the big news is just lack of volume. I don't know if anybody really wanted to take a position here ahead of the weekend with all this tariff news floating back and forth.
All right, and then moving over to the livestock side of things, we know they had a little bit of a bumpy day yesterday. At least, well, the lives came out pretty good. But how did the cattle and hogs do today, Curt?
Yeah, the cattle, they finished up about $1.20 in the Aprils. The hogs finished up about a buck. It kind of held it. Cattle continue to be on fire here. They finished the week strong, up $2.90. When you look at that supply-demand balance sheet we saw earlier here in the week, we still got some tight situations in front of us. And actually, demand's hanging in there quite well. The hogs did make a price reversal to the downside on the weekly chart. They finished down about 70, 80 cents on the weekly chart. So technically, they might have found a little bit of top in here. But the hogs continue to watch that tariff news. They're going to be affected that by quite a bit here as we go into April. The supply starting to get into the grocery store shelf here, because with this weather, cookout's going to start kicking up here pretty quick.
All right, Curt. Well, if folks want to think about what their market strategy should be, what they should be thinking about to protect and maybe get that 2025 market or grain marketed, what's the best way for them to get in touch with agmarket.net?
Agmarket.net, you've nailed it right there. And click on Intel. That's where the team puts together some real good information to take a peek at, to give you some different ideas. And also, too, we're here in Normal, Illinois at 1-800-779-1515.
All right, Curt. Well, we thank you so much for the insight. Have a happy St. Patrick's Day and enjoy the weekend.
Be safe. Have fun. Take care.
That again was Curt Kimmel of agmarket.net. Let's go ahead and run down those closing numbers for you. You can find that on our website at iowaagnet.com. At the close, corn was down 6 3/4 at 458.5. Soybeans up 5 1/4 at 10.16 even. Soy meal $1.20 lower at 305.90. Soy oil 31 cents higher at 41.59. Chicago wheat down 5 1/2 at 5.57 even. Kansas wheat down 1 1/2 at 5.86 even. Minneapolis spring wheat down 2 cents at 601 3/4. Oats down 2 3/4 at 367 3/4. On the Merc live cattle up $1.12 at 203.17. Feeders up $1.75 at 281.97. Lean hogs up $1 at $86.62. Pork cutouts unchanged at $94.50. Class 3 milk is 5 cents lower at the close at $18.54. And that's been the market recap, and that brings us to the end of today's show. You can find all our content online at iowaagnet.com, as well as follow us on Facebook, X, and on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're notified each time we put out a new video project. Also, don't forget about the Free Market Podcast 3 times a day, right to your mobile device, free of charge. Openings, middays, and closings. You can also find those on Facebook.com as well as iowaagnet.com. From the iAron Studios in Des Moines, I'm Dustin Huffman. For Mark Magnus and Andy Peterson and Riley Smith, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.